The day Karen Mitchell knocked on my door with that smug smile and a stack of legal papers, I never imagined I'd be sitting in her former office chair 6 months later, signing the very documents that would make her worst nightmare come true. My name is David, and this is the story of how a vindictive HOA president tried to destroy the last piece of my father's memory, and how I turned her own weapon against her in the most unexpected way possible. It started 3 years ago when I inherited my childhood home on Maple Ridge Drive. The house itself wasn't much, a modest 2-story built in the 70s, but it came with something priceless. Tucked away in the back corner of the lot, almost hidden by towering oak trees, stood my father's cabin. Dad built that cabin with his own hands when I was 12. I still remember the summer we spent together, him teaching me how to use a level, how to read the grain in wood, how patience and precision could create something that would last decades. It wasn't large, maybe 400 square feet, but every board, every nail, every shingle carried his love. After Dad passed 5 years ago, that cabin became my sanctuary. I'd go there on weekends, sometimes just to sit on the small porch and remember his laugh. The smell of cedar still lingered in the walls. His old coffee mug still sat on the windowsill, exactly where he'd left it. The neighborhood had changed since my childhood. What used to be a quiet street where kids rode bikes and neighbors knew each other's names had transformed into something else entirely. The Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association had formed about 10 years prior, and with it came rules. Lots of them. I'd managed to fly under their radar for the first 2 years. I kept my lawn neat, my house painted, and minded my own business. But that changed the morning Karen Mitchell discovered the cabin. I was inside, replacing a loose floorboard Dad had always meant to fix, when I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Through the window, I watched a woman in a crisp white blazer and perfectly styled blonde hair circle the structure like a shark scenting blood. She carried a clipboard and wore the kind of expression that suggested she'd found exactly what she was looking for. Karen had been the HOA president for 3 years, and in that time, she'd made quite a reputation for herself. Mrs. Henderson next door had warned me about her. That woman has made it her personal mission to find violations, she'd said. She walks the neighborhood every morning at 7 sharp, looking for anything out of place. 20 minutes after Karen's inspection, she was at my front door. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, not waiting for me to invite her in. "I'm Karen Mitchell, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. We need to discuss the unauthorized structure on your property." I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me. Something about her tone made me want to keep this conversation outside. "You mean my father's cabin?" "I mean the building that violates Section 4.2 of our community guidelines." She flipped through her papers with practiced efficiency. "No secondary structures are permitted without prior approval from the Architectural Review Board." "This cabin was never submitted for review. It's been there for over 20 years, I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Long before there was an HOA." Karen's smile was sharp as broken glass. "The HOA was established in 2014. All properties that joined the community agreed to bring their lots into compliance with existing guidelines, regardless of when structures were built." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October morning. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying you have 30 days to remove the structure or face daily fines of $50 until compliance is achieved." She handed me a formal notice, the paper still warm from her printer. "I suggest you start making arrangements with a demolition company." As I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the sidewalk with military precision, I realized this was about more than code violations. This was about power. And unfortunately for me, I had just become Karen Mitchell's newest project. Little did I know, she had no idea what kind of project she'd just taken now. IT started 3 years ago when I inherited my childhood home on Maple Ridge Drive. The house itself wasn't much a modest two-story built in the 70s, but it came with something priceless. Tucked away in the back corner of the lot, almost hidden by towering oak trees, stood my father's cabin. Dad built that cabin with his own hands when I was 12. I still remember the summer we spent together, him teaching me how to use a level, how to read the grain in wood, how patience and precision could create something that would last decades. It wasn't large, maybe 400 square feet, but every board, every nail, every shingle carried his love. After Dad passed 5 years ago, that cabin became my sanctuary. I'd go there on weekends, sometimes just to sit on the small porch and remember his laugh. The smell of cedar still lingered in the walls. His old coffee mug still sat on the windowsill, exactly where he'd left it. The neighborhood had changed since my childhood. What used to be a quiet street, where kids rode bikes and neighbors knew each other's names, had transformed into something else entirely. The Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association had formed about 10 years prior, and with it came rules. Lots of them. I'd managed to fly under their radar for the first 2 years. I kept my lawn neat, my house painted, and minded my own business. But that changed the morning Karen Mitchell discovered the cabin. I was inside, replacing a loose floorboard Dad had always meant to fix, when I heard footsteps on the gravel outside. Through the window, I watched a woman in a crisp white blazer and perfectly styled blonde hair circle the structure like a shark scenting blood. She carried a clipboard and wore the kind of expression that suggested she'd found exactly what she was looking for. Karen had been the HOA president for 3 years, and in that time, she'd made quite a reputation for herself. Mrs. Henderson next door had warned me about her. That woman has made it her personal mission to find violations, she'd said. She walks the neighborhood every morning at 7 sharp, looking for anything out of place. 20 minutes after Karen's inspection, she was at my front door. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, not waiting for me to invite her in. "I'm Karen Mitchell, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. We need to discuss the unauthorized structure on your property." I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me. Something about her tone made me want to keep this conversation outside. "You mean my father's cabin?" "I mean the building that violates Section 4.2 of our community guidelines." She flipped through her papers with practiced efficiency. "No secondary structures are permitted without prior approval from the Architectural Review Board. This cabin was never submitted for review." "It's been there for over 20 years, I said, trying to keep my voice level. "Long before there was an HOA. Karen's smile was sharp as broken glass. "The HOA was established in 2014. All properties that joined the community agreed to bring their lots into compliance with existing guidelines, regardless of when structures were built." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October morning. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying you have 30 days to remove the structure or face daily fines of $50 until compliance is achieved." She handed me a formal notice, the paper still warm from her printer. "I suggest you start making arrangements with the demolition company." As I watched her walk away, her heels clicking against the sidewalk with military precision, I realized this was about more than code violations. This was about power. And, unfortunately for me, I had just become Karen Mitchell's newest project. Little did I know, she had no idea what kind of project she'd just taken on. The escalation came 3 days after the meeting. I arrived home to find an official-looking truck parked in my driveway and 2 men in hard hats examining my cabin. Karen stood beside them, gesturing and talking rapidly. "Excuse me," I called out as I approached. "This is private property." One of the men, wearing a county inspector's badge, looked up from his clipboard. "We're here on a complaint about unpermitted construction." "Are you the property owner?" "I am." and I'd like to know what complaint you're referring to." Karen stepped forward, her smile triumphant. "I contacted the county building department about the unauthorized structure. They're here to conduct a safety inspection." My heart sank. County involvement meant this had moved far beyond HOA politics. If they found code violations and a 20-year-old cabin built by a loving father rather than a licensed contractor was bound to have some, I could be facing condemnation, fines, even criminal charges. The inspection took 2 hours. They checked electrical connections, foundation stability, roof structure, and everything in between. I watched from my back porch, feeling like I was witnessing the methodical dissection of my father's legacy. When they finished, the lead inspector approached me with a thick folder of paperwork. "Sir, I'm afraid we've identified several issues. The electrical work isn't up to current code, the foundation lacks proper footings, and the roof structure doesn't meet wind load requirements." What does that mean exactly? It means the structure poses potential safety hazards. We're issuing a condemnation order. You have 10 days to either bring everything up to current building codes or demolish the building. Karen's satisfaction was palpable. "I told you this would happen, Mr. Sullivan. The county doesn't play games when it comes to safety violations." After the inspector left, I called Martin again. His assessment was grim. Bringing a 20-year-old structure up to current code would cost more than building new, he said. "You're looking at complete electrical rewiring, foundation work, structural reinforcement. We're talking $20,000 to $30,000 minimum. And if I don't, daily fines start at $100 and escalate. Plus, if someone gets hurt on your property, you're liable for damages." "David, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but maybe it's time to consider." I hung up before he could finish the sentence. That night, I sat in the cabin for what I thought might be the last time. Dad's presence felt especially strong in the quiet darkness. I could almost hear his voice, telling me not to give up, reminding me that every problem had a solution if you looked hard enough. That's when I decided to fight back. If Karen wanted to use every tool at her disposal, then I needed to learn what tools I had access to as well. I spent the next 3 days at the county courthouse, digging through public records. HOA bylaws, board meeting minutes, financial reports, property transfers, anything I could get my hands on. What I discovered changed everything. The first red flag was in the HOA's financial records. Karen had been president for 3 years, but the association had been running at a deficit for the past 18 months. Monthly fees were supposed to cover landscaping, pool maintenance, and administrative costs, but the numbers didn't add up. More interesting was a pattern in the violation enforcement. Over the past year, Karen had issued violations to 17 different properties. 13 of those homeowners had paid significant fines rather than fight the citations. The total collected nearly $43,000. But the real bombshell was in the property records. 6 months ago, Willowbrook Estates LLC, a company that shared an address with Karen's real estate business, had purchased 3 lots in the neighborhood. All 3 had been homeowners who'd received extensive violation notices and ultimately decided to sell rather than deal with ongoing harassment. I spent another day tracing corporate filings and discovered that Willowbrook Estates LLC was owned by KM Properties, which was owned by Mitchell Family Trust. Karen wasn't just harassing homeowners out of some twisted sense of civic duty. She was systematically targeting properties, forcing sales, and buying them through shell companies at below-market prices. It was brilliant in a completely unethical way, and it was about to make me very dangerous to her operation. But I needed more evidence. Something concrete that would prove the pattern beyond any doubt. That's when I remembered Mrs. Henderson's comment about Karen's daily walks. Every morning at 7 sharp, she'd said, "Like clockwork, I started following her. For a week, I tracked Karen's routine from a discreet distance. She would start at the community center, walk systematically through each street, and return to her car exactly 45 minutes later. But on Thursday, she deviated from the pattern. Instead of ending her walk at the community center, Karen stopped at a house on Birch Lane. It was a modest ranch home with a perfectly maintained yard, but I noticed something odd. The owner, an elderly man named Robert Torres, was outside loading boxes into his car. I watched Karen approach him with her clipboard. Even from across the street, I could see the tension in their conversation. Mr. Torres kept shaking his head, pointing at his house, clearly distressed. Karen handed him a piece of paper and walked away, leaving him standing in his driveway, looking defeated. That evening, I knocked on Mr. Torres's door. "I'm sorry to bother you," I began, "but I couldn't help noticing you seemed upset this morning. I live over on Maple Ridge, and I've been having some problems with the HOA myself." Robert Torres was 73, a retired teacher who'd lived in his house for 15 years. His story was heartbreakingly familiar. "It started 2 months ago," he told me over coffee in his kitchen. "Violations for things I'd never heard of. My porch light was the wrong color temperature. My mailbox post was 2 inches too tall. They said my driveway had oil stains that were visible from the street." "What did you do?" "I fixed everything. Spent over $2,000 replacing and repairing things that were perfectly fine. But then came more violations. My doormat was the wrong size. My garden hose was visible for more than 4 hours during daylight. They fined me for having my trash cans out 15 minutes past the pickup deadline." The pattern was identical to what I'd experienced, but Mr. Torres had been enduring it for months longer. "Today she offered to buy my house," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Said she knew someone looking for property in the neighborhood, and maybe a sale would be easier than continuing to fight violations. She had the paperwork ready to sign." I felt my chest tighten with anger. "What did you tell her?" "I told her no. This is my home. My wife and I raised our children here. She's buried in St. Mary's Cemetery, just 3 miles away." His eyes filled with tears. "But I don't know how much more of this I can take. The fines are adding up, and I'm on a fixed income." That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to stop Karen Mitchell, but not through lawyers or county inspectors or HOA meetings. I was going to hit her where it would hurt the most, her wallet. Would you have done the same thing? Let me know in the comments, because what I discovered next would make even the most ethical person consider crossing some lines. The Willowbrook Estates HOA office was located in a small commercial plaza on the edge of our neighborhood. Karen rented the space for $600 a month, using it as both the administrative center for HOA business and a satellite office for her real estate company. It was perfect for her operation, professional appearing, centrally located, and just outside the neighborhood boundaries where most residents rarely ventured. What Karen didn't know was that the building's owner, Harold Kimmel, was getting ready to retire and had quietly put the entire plaza on the market. I found this out through my own real estate agent, Maria Santos, who'd helped me buy my father's house 3 years earlier. When I called her about potentially purchasing investment property, she mentioned several commercial opportunities, including a small plaza that was perfect for someone looking to own their first rental property. "The current owner is motivated to sell," Maria explained. "He's asking $450,000 for the building, but between you and me, I think he'd take $400. It's got 6 units, all occupied with established tenants. Good income potential." My heart started racing. What kind of tenants? Let me see. There's a tax preparation service, a small law firm, a real estate office, the HOA, management company for your neighborhood, a dry cleaner, and an insurance agent. Very stable, all current on their leases. I scheduled a viewing for that weekend. The building was exactly what I'd expected, a simple strip mall from the 80s. Well-maintained, but nothing fancy. Harold Kimmel met me at the property personally, eager to show off his investment. Bought this place in 1994, he told me as we walked through each unit. Best decision I ever made. Tenants have been stable, rents always on time, minimal maintenance issues. When we reached the HOA office, I tried to appear casually interested. What can you tell me about this tenant? Mitchell Property Management? They've been here about 3 years. Real estate lady, very professional. Handles the HOA for one of the neighborhoods nearby. Pays her rent early every month. I nodded, suppressing a smile. Seems like a good setup. Oh, it is. Though I should mention, most of the leases come up for renewal within the next 6 months. New owner would have the option to renegotiate terms or non-renew if they wanted to make changes. That night, I called Martin Reeves, this time with a very different kind of legal question. You want to buy your HOA's office building? He sounded confused. David, I'm not sure how that helps with the cabin situation. Trust me, Martin. Can you handle a commercial real estate transaction? Of course, but... And can you research what legal obligations a landlord has regarding lease renewals for tenants who might be engaged in questionable business practices? There was a long pause. David, what exactly are you planning? I'm planning to solve this problem the way Dad taught me, with patience, precision, and the right tools for the job. The purchase process took 6 weeks. Harold was indeed motivated to sell, and we settled on $410,000. I used the equity from my house, a small inheritance I'd been saving, and a commercial loan to make it work. During those 6 weeks, I continued documenting Karen's activities. I attended HOA meetings, recorded her harassment patterns, and, most importantly, I gathered evidence of her property acquisition scheme. Mr. Torres agreed to let me copy his violation notices, and I connected with other homeowners who'd been targeted. The picture that emerged was damning. Over 3 years, Karen had issued violations to 28 properties. 14 homeowners had paid substantial fines totaling over $60,000. 8 had sold their homes, 6 of which were purchased by companies connected to Karen's business interests. But the most interesting discovery came from reviewing the HOA's official meeting minutes. According to the bylaws, any violation fines over $500 required board approval. Karen had been issuing and collecting fines unilaterally, without oversight, in direct violation of the association's governing documents. The day I officially became the owner of the plaza, I hand-delivered a letter to each tenant announcing the ownership change and my commitment to maintaining positive relationships with established businesses. Karen's letter was identical to the others, but I'll admit, I took extra satisfaction in sliding it under her office door. 3 days later, I received a voicemail from Karen's secretary asking to schedule a meeting with the new building owner to discuss the lease renewal. I had Maria return the call and schedule the appointment for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. Karen arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in her usual power suit and carrying a leather portfolio thick with documents. I let her wait in the empty office space next to hers, the one I'd decided would become my new workspace. When I walked into the room, her expression shifted from professional courtesy to shocked recognition to barely controlled fury in about 3 seconds. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, standing so abruptly her chair rolled backward into the wall. "Good afternoon, Karen. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me about your lease renewal. This is... She struggled for words, which was deeply satisfying after months of her perfectly composed threats and ultimatums. "This is business," I finished for her. "Please, have a seat. We have a lot to discuss." She remained standing, her hands clenched at her sides. "What do you want?" What I want is very simple. I want you to stop harassing homeowners in our neighborhood. I want you to stop your systematic property acquisition scheme, and I want you to resign from the HOA board effective immediately." Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You can't prove anything." I opened my own folder and spread documents across the table between us. Violation notices, financial records, property transfers, corporate filings. The evidence of 3 years of carefully orchestrated fraud. "Actually, I can prove everything. The question is whether you want to resolve this privately or publicly." For the first time since I'd known her, Karen Mitchell looked genuinely afraid. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that you resign from the HOA board today and transfer all violation proceedings to the remaining board members for proper review. I'm proposing that you cease all enforcement activities immediately. And I'm proposing that you make good on the fines you've illegally collected without board approval. And if I don't?" I leaned back in my chair, feeling calmer than I had in months. "Then your lease expires in 60 days, and you'll need to find a new office. And I'll be filing complaints with the State Real Estate Board, the County Prosecutor's Office, and the IRS regarding your business practices." Karen stared at the document spread before her, her carefully constructed facade finally cracking. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. The legal fees alone will bankrupt you." "Karen, I'm not dealing with anything." "You are. Because in about 10 minutes, I'm walking next door to my new office, and I'm going to start making phone calls. The first call will be to Robert Torres to let him know that his violation fines have been rescinded. The second will be to Mrs. Henderson to tell her the same thing." I gathered up my papers and stood. "The third call will be to the county building inspector to inform him that the complaint against my property was filed maliciously by someone with a financial interest in forcing a sale." "You can't do this." "I already am doing it. The only question is whether you want to make this easy or difficult." The showdown I'd imagined for months ended not with dramatic courtroom arguments or heated public confrontations, but with Karen Mitchell sitting alone in an empty office, staring at the evidence of her own greed spread across a folding table. 20 minutes later, I received her resignation letter via email. But that wasn't the end of the story. Because sometimes, when you think you've won, the real victory is still waiting around the corner. Moving into Karen's former office wasn't just symbolic, it was practical. As the new owner of the building, I needed a base of operations for managing the property. But there was something deeply satisfying about setting up my desk, exactly where hers had been, looking out the same window where she'd planned her harassment campaigns. The HOA leadership transition was surprisingly smooth. With Karen gone, the remaining board members, who'd mostly been rubber stamping her decisions out of intimidation rather than agreement, were eager to reform the organization's practices. Mrs. Henderson was elected as the new president, and one of their first acts was to establish a proper appeals process for violations. Mr. Torres was one of the first beneficiaries. Not only were his fines rescinded, but the board formally apologized for the harassment he'd endured. When I visited him a month later, he was back to working in his garden, humming softly as he tended his tomato. "I can't thank you enough," he said, wiping soil from his hands on an old towel. I was ready to give up, sell the house, move into one of those senior communities. This place has my whole life in it. The county building inspector proved more complicated. While my complaint about Karen's malicious intent was noted, the safety violations in Dad's cabin were still legitimate. But with the HOA pressure removed, I had time to explore options. That's when I discovered something that changed everything yet again. While researching building codes and grandfather clauses, I stumbled across a provision I'd never heard of, the Accessory Dwelling Unit Ordinance. The county had recently passed new zoning laws to address the housing shortage, allowing property owners to add small secondary residences for family members or rental income. The requirements were specific but manageable. Structures had to be under 500 square feet, properly wired and plumbed, and meet current safety standards. But here's what made it perfect. Existing structures could be converted to ADAS through a streamlined approval process, with some code requirements waived if the conversion served affordable housing goals. I called Martin with the idea, and for the first time in months, I heard optimism in his voice. "It's brilliant," he said. "Instead of demolishing the cabin or spending $30,000 on compliance, you convert it to an accessory dwelling unit. The county gets another housing option. You preserve your father's work, and the cost is maybe $8,000 to $10,000 for the electrical and plumbing upgrades." The conversion took 4 months. I hired Dad's old friend, Tommy Chen, Mr. Chen's brother, as it turned out, to do the electrical work. Tommy had worked with Dad on several projects over the years, and he understood what the cabin meant to me. "Your dad would be proud," Tommy said, as we installed the new electrical panel. He always said a building should serve its purpose, whatever that purpose becomes. The plumbing was trickier, but we managed to add a small bathroom and kitchenette without compromising the cabin's character. Dad's workbench became a kitchen counter. His old tool storage became a bedroom closet. The wide plank floors he'd installed with such care were refinished, but otherwise unchanged. When the conversion was complete, I faced a decision: rent it out, as the county intended, or keep it as my personal retreat. The answer came to me while I was installing the final piece, Dad's old wind chimes, rehung from the eaves in exactly the same spot. I rented the cabin to Robert Torres. His house had become too much for him to maintain alone, but he wasn't ready for a retirement community. The cabin gave him independence while keeping him in the neighborhood he loved. More importantly, it meant Dad's sanctuary would continue to shelter someone who needed it. "Are you sure about the rent?" Robert asked, when I told him I was only charging him $600 a month, well below market rate for the area. "I'm sure. Dad built this place with love, Mr. Torres. It should be filled with love, not profit." The irony wasn't lost on me. Karen had tried to destroy the cabin to eliminate an obstacle to her property schemes. Instead, her actions had led to me owning her office building, transforming the cabin into legal housing, and providing a home for one of her victims. 6 months after Karen's resignation, I received an unexpected visitor. She appeared at my new office without an appointment, looking older and more tired than I remembered. "I wanted to apologize," she said, standing awkwardly in my doorway. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same chair where she'd once sat plotting violations and harassment campaigns. "The state real estate board suspended my license," she continued, her voice small and defeated. "I'm facing civil lawsuits from 3 former clients. My husband filed for divorce last month." I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. Looking at Karen now, I saw not a villain, but a person who'd made terrible choices and was living with the consequences. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that what I did was wrong. The harassment, the property scheme, all of it. I let ambition and greed turn me into someone I didn't recognize." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you fought back. Someone needed to." After she left, I sat in my office for a long time, thinking about justice and revenge, and the difference between the two. I'd set out to save my father's cabin, and I'd succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. But more than that, I'd helped protect a community from predatory behavior and provided a home for someone who needed it. That evening, I walked over to check on Mr. Torres. I found him sitting on the cabin's small porch, drinking coffee from Dad's old mug and watching the sunset through the oak trees. "Beautiful evening," he said, raising the mug in greeting. "Yeah," I replied, settling into the chair beside him. It really is. Dad's wind chimes sang softly in the breeze, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at peace that it has been 2 years since I bought the plaza and moved into Karen's old office. The building has become something of a community gathering place, not by design, but by accident. When residents need to discuss HOA business, they stop by my office instead of driving to the community center. Mrs. Henderson holds her informal office hours there twice a week, helping neighbors navigate association policies with the patience and wisdom that comes from surviving your own battle with bureaucratic tyranny. The cabin, now officially designated as Accessory Dwelling Unit 1 in the county records, has become exactly what Dad would have wanted it to be, a place of refuge and peace. Robert tends a small garden beside it, grows the best tomatoes I've ever tasted, and has become the grandfather figure our neighborhood never knew it needed. Sometimes I catch myself watching him through my office window as he works in the garden or sits on the porch reading. There's something profoundly right about seeing life continue in the space Dad created with such love. The HOA operates differently now. Violations are still issued when necessary, but they're reviewed by the full board and focused on legitimate safety or property value concerns, rather than petty harassment. The association's finances are transparent, with quarterly reports posted online for all residents to review. Most importantly, we've established a hardship fund for residents who need help bringing their properties into compliance. Instead of using violations as weapons, we use them as opportunities to support our neighbors. Karen Mitchell moved away 6 months after our final conversation. I heard from Maria Santos that she relocated to Arizona, where she's working for someone else's real estate company. I hope she's found peace and learned from her mistakes. Everyone deserves a second chance to become the person they're meant to be. As for me, I've discovered that owning a small commercial building suits me better than I expected. The other tenants have become friends, and managing the property gives me a sense of purpose that my regular job never provided. I'm considering expanding into other real estate investments, but for now, this feels like exactly where I'm supposed to be. Some evenings, when the day's work is done, I walk next door to visit Robert and sit on the cabin porch. We don't always talk. Sometimes we just sit in comfortable silence, listening to the wind chimes and watching the seasons change through the oak trees. Those moments remind me of the most important lesson I learned through this entire ordeal. Sometimes the best way to honor the past is to let it serve the present. Dad's cabin is still standing, still sheltering someone who needs it, still filled with love. It's just a different kind of love than we originally intended. And sometimes, that's exactly how things are supposed to work out. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced HOA harassment or dealt with someone who abused their authority? How did you handle it? Your stories and support mean the world to me. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about standing up to bullies, fighting injustice, and finding unexpected solutions to impossible problems. There are so many more stories to share, stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when pushed to their limits. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be defeated. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.